Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Take Your Shot podcast. Today we've got Kenzi Green from Kenzi Green Design and the Brief Collective, and she is the founder of a luxury brand and web design studio serving women-owned businesses. She's also the co-founder of the Brief Collective, which is an online design community and education platform for other designers, and she's been using social media to grow her business over the last 5 years, and it is her number one lead generator. And so today we're going to be talking all about just how to grow an audience on social media that converts. So Kenzi, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So I graduated with my bachelor's degree it's called interactive media design, but it's basically graphic design in 2019. And when I graduated, I was actually fully self-employed, and I have been running my brand and web design studio ever since then. I eventually branched out into education for other designers, and I have basically made social media my number one lead generator. I have grown both of those business accounts to over 50,000 followers, and although followers are technically at the end of the day just a vanity metric, that is also how I actually obtain basically all of my clients and all of the designers that I teach as well. So I've really had a lot of time to hone in on how to craft content that converts into actual paying clients or customers.
So awesome. And there's such a need there too, because I think so many times people think of like, oh, I need to grow my Instagram. I need to do these things, so they don't know where to start. But then not only that, it's not just about growing, it's about converting and actually turning them into your clients. And I think that's so cool that that's like what you specifically do. I'd love to just kind of define social media. So like when you talk about social media, what platform or platforms do you primarily focus on? And do you want to mainly talk about today?
So I primarily focus on Instagram and TikTok. Facebook's kind of, it's in there, but it's not really a high priority. And Instagram and TikTok have really worked so well for me personally because short form video content is really where my genius lies. And I think it's also what's kind of most popular right now.
Totally. And that's so true, especially with like from the pandemic on, like I feel like everyone's just like in that world of TikTok, and Instagram's like trying to be that with Reels. And I think that's so cool that you just like focus in on like, okay, here's what I'm really good at, so I'm just going to do that versus trying to do all the things. And so for people listening here today and wanting to learn more about like TikTok and Instagram and what to do, because that's kind of where you specialize in, what would you say are some of the biggest things you feel people are missing out on when it comes to growing their social media in a strategic way?
Well, the first thing is that I feel like a lot of people don't quite understand how to make engaging content. Some people have just resorted to, okay, let me post and put something out there, and they're not really thinking about how it's going to be perceived or how people are going to consume the content, or they're doing the opposite and actually thinking way too hard about what they're going to post. They're spending way too much time on the caption, way too much time putting the video together, and they're not getting out a lot of content. Therefore, their content creation skill is not actually improving or growing. Therefore, they're struggling to actually convert their audience on social media into paying clients.
For you, have you ever struggled with any of that when you were growing your own audience, or like was there anything specifically that helped you kind of overcome that?
Oh yeah, so when I started my business, I actually started my business in like 2018, so short form video content hadn't really hit yet when I first started, and so I was like just making a lot of in-feed Instagram posts, and I started actually posting in-feed posts manually every single day, Monday through Friday at 12 o'clock on the dot. I was making content because I really wanted to get better at it, but I also knew that that was a way that I could start generating more clients for my business. And I saw other people doing less and growing their accounts. So I felt kind of left behind. I felt betrayed by the algorithm. I felt frustrated, and that went on for at least a good 2 years. And I felt like I was making this really good content and I was getting good feedback about it, but I wasn't really seeing any results. And it wasn't until short form video content came out that I was like, okay, here's a new way to present content. Let me learn how to do this and figure out how to use short form video content. And then all of a sudden, my social media finally, after years of struggling, started to skyrocket. And I think that's really because not only had I spent those years practicing how to craft what I'm trying to say in a digestible way, but also because sometimes communicating things through video versus just static posts is totally different. And a lot of people can share and tell a story much easier in video content than they can static feed post. And they just haven't discovered how to do that yet.
Yeah. And I think that's so true, because I think when you get on a video, like, people can like read a post, right? But at the end of the day, and especially in today's world where everything is so driven by AI and written by AI, but like when they see someone actually talking and speaking from the heart, or sharing like pieces of their business that can be communicated in a more personal way, I think you're spot on in just saying that the value of video is totally there. And it's just about like finding your personal voice. And when people start hearing your voice, I'm sure that helps with the know, like, and trust factor, right? And having them kind of like build that connection with you. So I think that's so awesome that you like literally even early on were just like, yeah, I'm going to like figure out how to do this video thing, even before it was like a whole thing. And really thinking strategically about that. And I think for people who are like overwhelmed with video content, because I know especially for photographers, they're like, okay, well, I want to post my photos, but like I don't want to show my face, or I don't want to have to talk on video. Like, what advice would you have for the person that feels maybe a little bit overwhelmed when it comes to creating kind of short form video content?
Start small. And I also want to say that it's possible to grow your social media without showing your face, but it's going to be 10 times easier if you step out of your comfort zone and push yourself to put your face on camera. In my eyes, I never really had this desire to go on social media and talk to the camera and put my face out there. Like, that was very uncomfortable for me, especially as someone who was more introverted at the time when I started my business. That seemed super intimidating. So I started out, again, baby steps, by posting Instagram stories, by talking to my story. Maybe it was a picture every other day, and then maybe I started doing video clips, and then eventually I felt comfortable enough to actually do video content within my feed. And so I think starting there is really important, but also just remembering that if you're newer to content creation, just start posting, because it's a skill. That's how you're going to get better. It's like when you start using a camera for the first time, you don't know how to work all the buttons, but eventually you start practicing with different lighting, you start seeing the results from the things you're doing, and then you learn how to do it better. It's the same thing with content. So in the beginning, I think more content is better than less content that you've spent hours, thinking about how to do it best. Like, more is better in the beginning.
Especially as you're refining it, and you kind of touched on it a little bit of like finding your voice and finding what works. And sometimes to find what works, you have to figure out what doesn't work, right? Like, you have to like be willing to try those things. And yeah, so I think that's really good. And it's just like starting small. So like, first, like, what would starting small look like? Are you talking small as in like type of videos you do, like smaller videos, or like frequency? Like, what do you mean by starting small?
Really, when I say start small, I'm referring to your comfort zone. Like, and this is going to depend on where you're at in your journey, right? So like for some people, they can film, a time lapse of them working and then put it on their feed and add some text to it. And that's a little challenging for them, but they're okay doing that. And then they can go a step further and actually do a voiceover in the video with text. And then they can go a step further and put their face on camera. Whereas I've met other people who even just posting a story is hard for them. So I think you have to determine where you at on that comfortability scale, and how can you start to push the zone a little bit further and further each time you go to make content.
And then kind of on the topic of content, I'd love to transition a little bit before we talk through a little bit more of like the growing piece, like the planning piece, because I think people get overwhelmed with like kind of where to start. And I think starting small is really good. But when it comes to like strategizing and kind of figuring out where you want to take your business, what you want to do with social media, and like kind of like the audience you're trying to grow, what advice do you have for actually creating that content, or even figuring out like what content to create?
Stop looking at what other successful people in your industry are doing and start thinking about your dream clients and what they need to see and what message you need to communicate to them. A big mistake I see a lot of people make is that they go look at what others are already doing in the industry and try to emulate what they're doing, and it doesn't translate and it doesn't convert into paying clients because it comes off as unoriginal. And I do believe that content has energy, and you can feel someone's energy, you can feel the vibe, you can feel how they're coming to social media in that post. And if it's just heavily recreated based on somebody else's content, you can feel that. Whereas if you just come up with your own idea based on what you think or know your dream clients need to see, it's going to come off completely differently.
I think that's really good. And then I guess like kind of going off that, like what then are your thoughts on trends? Because I know trending audios, trending this, trending that, that's kind of a big thing in TikTok and Instagram, especially with like creating those short form videos. Do you have thoughts on like, should people be adapting to the trends? Should they not? Does that matter? Is it relevant? What are your thoughts on people who maybe are trying to figure out like what to do with like these trends? Do they hop on it? Should they not?
I think that trends can be useful, but I think there's an appropriate amount of usage. I think that you need to experiment with your content to figure out how you like to show up. Once you figure that out, you can show up in that way quite often. And then when you see a trend that you feel aligned with, that you can apply to your business, I think it's good to incorporate that because it's usually fun. It usually lets your personality shine. And I feel like there has to be a good medium. And this goes back to, again, like I said in the beginning, it's better to just do more than think about what you're going to post and post a little amount in the beginning, because the more you post, the more you realize how you like to show up, and you'll eventually form what I like to refer to as a content style. So like for me, my content style is I like to film my computer screen, designing a brand identity, and I have a voiceover where I'm storytelling, and that's my content style. And I've done it for so long that people actually recognize that that's my video when I create content. So like you have to find your content style, but then you can work in those trends here and there to do something different, keep it exciting, and keep experimenting.
And so you figure out your style, you're starting small, you're kind of building off these things. Do you have like any tools you use for like planning in advance or strategizing like what you post and when? Or do you kind of think like, oh, this is kind of what's on my heart right now? Like how much of what you post is in real time and how much of it is done in advance?
People find this so shocking when I tell them, because I think the norm is to like plan your content in advance. And I think a lot of people like planning their content in advance. I have never, ever done that. And I am someone who is very motivated by how I'm feeling in the moment. And I'm big on taking action. So like if I have an idea, if I can do that idea right then and there, I will make that piece of content. Even if it's nighttime, like I'll go get my ring light and make the video right then and there and post it. So I really don't plan out my content. Maybe I'll plan it out like a day or two in advance if I get an idea while I'm scrolling in the moment and go pop it in my notes and then make it like a day or two later. But outside of that, I don't plan my content. And I think that there is something to be said about being able to do that and push yourself to do that, because I think that's one of the things that has allowed me to get this content creation skill, is the fact that I don't plan and I don't just sit there and think of all these different things in advance. I think that sometimes you make your best content in the moment.
Wow. And I feel like that's kind of badass actually, because not everyone would say that, especially as someone who's like a strategist when it comes to social media. But I actually think that's really cool, because there's so many people who relate to that. I know for me, I actually kind of skew that way too. I think a lot of creatives do, right? Like, because when you're creative and you're inspired, that's when you want to create, right? But if you're kind of just like, oh, okay, I got to sit down and plan out these things, and you don't really know what you're going to say, it really does reflect,
it feels
I think.
Forced.
Exactly. And I think people are turning to AI and just having AI batch things and do that, which I think can be helpful to an extent if you don't have like ideas. But I think the genuine side of things, and I think the whole point of social media is to be social, build that like actual connection. And it's really hard to do that if you're like planning, like you don't know how you're going to connect with your audience in 2 weeks from now, because you don't know what's going to be going on in the world or what you're feeling. And so I do actually think that's a really cool take that you have, and I think there's definitely space for that. So that's super cool, and clearly it's done really well for you, having multiple accounts over 50K. Like that's amazing. Okay, so now we've got to talk through like the content strategy, how to think about it, how to plan for it. Now, when it comes to actually creating it, do you have any tools that you recommend for people to use when it comes to like actually creating these reels and videos for TikTok?
So the two things I recommend doing are, number one, compiling B-roll. And B-roll is basically just a bunch of video clips of you at work, you working with clients. Like, it can be anything. It's basically almost like a content bank of videos that you can go and pull from in the future. So that's something where when you get an idea, or maybe you do want to plan in advance, those things can really come in handy, because you can just go grab that clip and then add your text or whatever you need to. So I recommend doing that. And then the second thing that is literally an actual tool, is CapCut. And one of the reasons I like CapCut is because it is an app that is not related directly to TikTok or Instagram, although you can like import templates and things like that. But I can take a video, I can add text on there, I can do my voiceover. It's really easy to edit. It auto saves, so it doesn't like get lost if an app crashes or anything like that. But once I create that video, I can export it and post it to both Instagram and TikTok. So it cuts down on the workload. And that's what I use to edit most of my videos. If it's a shorter video, maybe a few seconds, sometimes I'll edit within Instagram or within TikTok, but a lot of times I'm using CapCut. They have a free version. I have the paid version, and I think, either way is good.
Out of curiosity, because I'm not super familiar with the paid version, but what are some of the pros of using the paid version versus the free?
CapCut gives you more features when you pay for it, like adding your own font or having more transitions to choose from or more sounds to choose from. So it's just things like that. Like you can use the free version and it'll work okay, but the paid version definitely has a lot of benefit.
Cool. So that's good to evaluate for sure, especially like long-term goals and like how specific you want to be with things. So I think that's great. And it totally makes sense as a brand designer, right? Like when you want to be able to like load your fonts and all that, totally makes sense. So a big part of like what I want to talk about is what are some things that people should be focusing on when it comes to growing an audience that actually converts?
All right. So like I said earlier, consider your dream clients' pain points and or their desires. Then with that knowledge, you can figure out how to show a transformation, whether that's a before and after, or what the client asked for versus what you delivered, or what the past was like versus now. Like learning how to show a transformation and cast a vision or a picture for your dream clients is super, super important. And I think photographers have a very special advantage when it comes to doing that, because in my personal opinion, it's a lot easier to do that with something so visual versus something a little bit more complex. It's also really important to step away from this idea that we have to be like super professional on the internet. Professionalism is out, in my opinion, for the most part. Like, if you're staying inside this box of what you have deemed in your head by society as professional, you're probably creating boring content for the most part. And I mean that in the most respectful way possible. People want relatability. They want to see your personality. They want to connect with people that have the same values. And in order to show that, like, you've just got to not be afraid to show up as yourself. And, the buzzword is being authentic, but it's really true that I think for a lot of people, when they start creating content, they have this set of things they can and can't do in their mind, and that limits their creativity and it limits their potential with content and actually creating things that are going to connect with the people they want to work with. The other thing is editing. People need to spend more time editing. Like I said, content creation is a skill, and knowing how to edit your videos, although it might be a 10-second video, the editing can make or break your video. From how you place the text on the screen to the movement that appears and things like that. I think if more people spent time learning how to actually edit, they could better communicate their ideas. And then we also talked about this earlier, simply experimenting and finding your content style that you can build your brand around. I think ultimately what it comes down to is a combination of learning how to improve the content creation skill, getting clear on your dream client's desires or pain points, and then just figuring out how to take your personality and show transformation based on the skill set and the values that you have as a business owner.
Totally. And I think that's so good. Just like making sure that you're relating to a specific pain point, because I feel like that'll make your audience feel seen and heard specifically by you. And then you also have the solution they need to solve that. Like, that's gold. Everything you just said there, if anyone listening, just seriously, if you just take that one thing away of just like what to create, like, you're solving problems for your clients and you are trying to like be the solution that they're looking for in terms of like having someone that you can trust to document your day or having the perfect brand and all those things. Like, there's just so much there. So that's really, really good. And I think for people coming to the editing piece, so I know that editing can be a really overwhelming thing for people. They don't always know what to do. I know you've shared some great apps that they can do, but like, what are some things that you see in the specific, like, actual execution of the edits that, like, you think people are making mistakes on? Like, what are some of the common mistakes you see people making with editing and then not fully communicating their brand value?
So I think that, nearly every business owner I've come into contact with knows what they're talking about. They have great ideas, they have great tips, they have a lot of knowledge. That's why they became a business owner, but they're not presenting it in the best way possible. And that's why it's not converting into paying clients. So some of the things that I see a lot are, number one, the millennial pause. It's where people will click the record button and there's a brief moment of pause before they start talking. And it's almost like an instant killer of your content if you are doing that. So cut out any dead space, and I mean any of it. And this is probably like one of the biggest issues for people who are newer to content. Like, it can take a while to sit there and trim each clip, but it's a must-have at this point. The other thing I see people doing is that they're either not adding enough visuals, or they're just presenting the information in a way that is overdone, and people have become so accustomed to it that it doesn't even register in their minds anymore. So, for example, saying, hey, I'm a photographer and blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, I'm this. Do you feel like blah, blah, blah? That doesn't work anymore because it has been done so many times. People's brains literally just, it's in and out. So you have to find ways to present that idea in a storytelling format. So like, instead of saying, hey, I'm a photographer and blah, 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 you could say, 5 years ago, I was struggling to make ends meet, and I just decided to pick up a camera from my friend, started taking some pictures, and now I own a 6-figure photography business. Read the caption to learn how. Like, it's saying what you want to say in a totally different way that's not straightforward. And like, it's kind of hard to explain that, but it's a lot easier when I'm sitting there coaching people, like, okay, here's what to do differently with your content, this, and this. And so millennial pause, presenting your content differently. And then when it comes to visuals, adding overlays can make a huge difference. And what I mean by an overlay is, this is a feature in CapCut that I really like. Let's say you have a clip where you're talking to the camera. You can take one of those B-roll clips that I referred to earlier and overlay it on your video. So as you're talking, there's something else, some visual happening on the screen that supports what you're talking about. That can make such a big difference, and so many people aren't doing that because they simply haven't taken the time to learn how to edit.
Thanks for just kind of like breaking down the editing, because I think so many people struggle when it comes to figuring out, okay, like what makes a good edit and how do I look unique in a world where everyone's kind of copying and pasting and just following the same templates. So I think that's super helpful to give the visualization. And try an overlay. If you're listening to this and you're not sure what that looks like, look at Kenzi's Instagram. I've got it linked in the show notes, but it's definitely worth trying. And I think it's something I'm for sure going to try. And that's something I took away from this episode. So thanks for that. So I guess, Kenzi, transitioning to like being consistent. So what tips do you have for someone who is maybe taking all this in and they're figuring out, okay, how do I take this and be consistent?
You need to make a schedule that works for you, that you can stick to. So a big mistake I see people make when it comes to this is that they try to full blast 5 days a week all at once. They're like, I want to get better at content. 5 days a week, all at once, post every day. And then they burn out and then they disappear. And then they come back and then they do it over and over again. And that is not sustainable. And it's not really going to help you grow your social media. So if you want to be consistent, figure out a schedule that's going to align with your lifestyle. If that is posting 3 times a week in the afternoon, stick to that. If it's posting 5 times a week, that's great. But pick something that you can stick to so that you don't get into this cycle of showing up, disappearing, because then it's just going to diminish all of the work you put in during the time you were present.
Totally. And I think, yeah, that goes in line too with just like starting small, of like what can you commit to, and like starting with that. So I think that's awesome. And then in terms of organization, so in order to be consistent, you also probably need to be somewhat organized. Do you have any sort of strategy for organization and kind of keeping things more in a streamlined fashion?
So I think that as long as you have entertainment, transformation, education, you know your brand values, you know your tone of voice, you know what your ultimate purpose is as a business owner, and every time you go to create a piece of content, it revolves around one of those 3 pillars and relates back to your brand. As long as you are showing up consistently and switching up the pillar of content, that's as far as I go when it comes to organization and planning. Like, I really, some people hire social media people and get this really big, well thought out, crazy strategy. And like, that may work for some people, and that may work better for people who are really type A and need to plan it out. But for someone who is more in the moment, post when they're inspired, if you just know your 3 pillars of how do I show up to create entertainment, how can I show transformation, and how can I also educate, and just revolve your content around those things consistently, you're going to be fine. And that's literally what I do. There's no crazy, well thought out, long-term strategy. It's just in my head, okay, let me do a reel on educating. I want to show a transformation with this recent client project. Ooh, this trend is going to be funny. It's going to be entertaining. Let me do that. And like, I just kind of revolve around those things. And like, it's not rigid. Like, you don't have to stick to something so rigid and make it feel so forced.
Totally. And for people trying to figure out like what should their pillars be, do you have any advice for them to like figure out what works for them? Like, how did you find your pillars?
Well, I think in general, entertainment, transformation, education apply to almost any business out there. So those are really like high level overview pillars. If you want to go deeper than that, that's where you really break down like your dream clients and going back to that whole thing and like touching on their specific pain points. So I think you'd have to really sit down and like write out what type of genre of content or pillars specifically catered to your dream clients makes sense. But I also think that you don't necessarily need to do that, especially if you're still in the beginning stages of creating content. I think that sometimes strategy can actually prevent people from making progress when it comes to content because they overthink it so much. They're like, is this thing strategic? How are people going to perceive it? And they start getting in their head about how the content's going to be perceived. And then it actually leads to a lack of creativity and a lack of progress.
Man, that is so good because it's so easy to get overwhelmed with a lot of this, and you just shared so much information, but you really did a great job today, Kenzi, and I'm so thankful for you to just like break it down into these bite-sized pieces, talking through common mistakes people make, what to do in terms of actually like putting together a plan and like how to know what to post and like a little bit of like the intentionality behind what you're doing and the problems you're solving. Like, you just shared so much. And so thank you so much for your time today. Are there any concluding thoughts or resources you'd like to leave our guests with?
Yes, so I have 2 final thoughts. One is that if you're listening to this and you felt really inspired to make more content, but you want guidance, I highly recommend checking out my new program. And this is where I will actually be coaching business owners one-on-one over a 30-day period on creating better high converting content and, kind of going into the things we talked about. I also provide a little workshop that actually touches on CapCut and some of these terms we discussed. So, if you're wanting to create your own content and you want somebody to coach you on that, that would probably be a great place to go. The other thing I wanted to add is that your brand and your website also plays a huge role in how well your content converts, right? Like, you can have really good social media feed. You can have a post that goes insanely viral. The post is really good. But if people get to your Instagram and the messaging's unclear, they're going to drop off. And then if those people do end up going to your website and your website isn't designed to convert and it's not catered towards your dream clients or designed to convert, they're going to drop off there. So I think that, having a solid brand, knowing who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, your purpose, your mission, the way your website's designed, and your social media, the content itself, all play together when it comes to actually converting people into paying clients. And then one of my series that I did when it came to creating content was making ugly websites. And this is what I'm talking about when, like, I could have came on camera and been like, here's tips for your website, but that's overdone. So what I did was I actually made an ugly website on purpose, and then I showed people how to fix it. And you can actually download my entire 7-day ugly website series, And I go over like what to do on your about page, what to do on your homepage, and like how to make your website more highly converting. So that'd probably be a good resource if people are concerned about how well their website is converting.
So good. So good. Yeah, everything's going to be linked here below. But seriously, thank you so much, Kenzi, for taking the time to talk a lot about like social media growth and strategy. I think you've got so much knowledge there and experience. So everyone go check her out. You can find her in the show notes below. But seriously, thank you so much for your time today. And for everyone listening, we'll see you next week.